All right, good day, folks. We're here. I'm having a very, very interesting conversation with some representatives from the Department of Environment. We're going to talk about sharks, super interesting conversation, and then a little bit about the starfish, which is something that is always incredibly topical about how we can protect the ecosystem, especially in our oceans. So, first of all, I'm pleased to have us joined by John Bothwell, who's the manager and legislation implementation and coordination unit of the coordination unit. My apologies. So, good morning, John, and thank you so much, and welcome to the program.
Morning, Sandy. Thanks for having us on.
And we've also got Tim Austin, and Tim is the deputy director for the Department of Environment. Good day, Tim. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing really well. Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having us and really looking forward to the show today.
Absolutely. And Joanna Kohler is the Shark Project Officer. Joanna, your job sounds the most fun, I got to tell you.
It is. Thank you for having us.
Yes, absolutely. So, I'm so glad that you guys have agreed to come on the program. I feel the Department of Environment does so much in this country, and sometimes you guys go a bit under the radar. So we don't always know as the community what you've got going on. So this is an excellent opportunity to educate the people in the Cayman Islands about some very, very specific issues here today. So let's kick it off. Recently, there was some video footage about a week or so ago that I received with some sharks at the sandbar. And the commentary that was sent with the video footage was very, very strong. And it was like, what are these people doing? The next thing you know, we're going to have a shark incident. Someone's going to get bitten by a shark. So I think we need to, of course, put these things in context so that people are not unduly afraid, but also have the knowledge and wisdom of what they should and shouldn't be doing when they're in an environment such as the ocean. And these things are part of nature, right? Of Mother Nature. So let's talk about sharks. Did they just show up after COVID? Is that my imagination, or how long have they been at the sandbar in particular?
Well, I'll start with that one. No, they didn't just show up after COVID. We've had sharks around forever, as everyone knows. And I'll toss over to Johanna in a second to talk about what the DOE surveys are showing and what's being seen out there. But we think has probably occurred is after COVID, it's been other changes that are letting people perhaps see sharks a little bit more than they are now. And of course, shifting baselines. We now record everything as after COVID. Previously, it was after Ivan. So we're just noticing
Yes.
what's new.
Right.
But Johanna, I don't know if you want to jump in, because I know you've been doing
Yeah.
heading the studies out there for quite a while now.
Yes. So the DOE has been conducting shark research, including tagging, tracking, and underwater cameras surveys biannually, those surveys in the North Sound since 2009. And
Right.
we know that we have resident blacktip sharks, resident reef sharks, nurse sharks, and they live in the North Sound for the past decade. So sharks were not normally seen visibly in the daylight at the sandbar when there were high levels of visitors activities at the sandbar. And the change in human behavior has caused the sharks to be more curious at the moment.
So when you say more curious, is that something that people should automatically be worried about? Because I think we're also curious about them. Of course, they're where they're supposed to be. They're in the ocean, and we're kind of encroaching on their territory. So is this curiosity for them a good thing or not?
I'm happy to take that if that's okay. Interesting. Yeah. So the curiosity is probably not a good thing for the sharks ultimately, because human nature being what it is, usually doesn't end well for the shark. So we're trying at this point to try to manage that situation. Yeah, but the curiosity, the situation that's changed, as Johanna and John have alluded to, that during COVID, sandbar was a lot quieter. Sharks typically were very shy and wary of humans, and during the period when the sandbar was not so active with visitors, there was a feeding program going on, and they kind of associated that program and potentially started to become a little braver getting into the area. At DOE, we were hopeful that once the visitor activity returned, that their shyness would be re-invoked, but it doesn't look like it's happened. And we got a couple of sharks that do turn up regularly, and That's what's causing a lot of the concerns at the moment. Yeah, so curiosity of a shark, yes, we are doing unnatural things at the moment, feeding stingrays. We've got an unnaturally large population of stingrays, which doesn't normally happen in the wild. Stingrays are solitary. Any kind of wildlife feeding experience is prone to these kind of problems, which is why DOE typically tries to avoid it. The sandbar was set up to recognize that stingray feeding was a long tradition here in Cayman. And we tried to work with it with the WIS zones, the wildlife interaction zones, which is the only place on the islands you are actually allowed to feed wildlife, animals in this particular instance. But interestingly, it's illegal to feed and chum and attract sharks anywhere around the islands. That was a law from, I think, 2007. So, yeah, this is a difficult situation. People are feeding rays. It's an unnatural situation. There is food in the water, and naturally there are other animals other than stingrays that are interested in that food now. And we think largely that's what's occurring at the moment.
Very interesting. Joanna, let me ask you a little bit. You've named a number of sharks that have been tagged in Cayman waters and that are, sort of familiar to the area, generally speaking. What kind of sharks are we seeing at the sandbar? Is it a combination or is it just a particular type?
No, we usually see Caribbean reef, which is the most common shark on our waters, together with the nurse shark. But that's the one that we see. And interestingly, we also see blacktip sharks there, which is one of the rarer species in Cayman, which is quite exciting because we usually don't see them. Divers usually don't report them on their dives, and even on our surveys, they're just very rarely recorded. So it's actually really nice to see that they are around. And yeah, it is quite a rare sight that we see them at the sandbar.
And do we have a sense of how healthy the ecosystem is? Because of course, sharks are considered, a top predator in the ocean food chain. And a lot of people, I was speaking to someone yesterday, and they're like, "Oh, we should just start killing sharks." I was like, "What?" I'm like, "No, you don't kill sharks." And they said, "Well, back in the day, you could kill them for food and this, that." And I said, "Listen, I'm hoping that we're educating ourselves that, especially the top predators, like honestly, you leave them alone. They have a very, very significant purpose in the ocean. And other than observation, occasionally, if you see them, you shouldn't really be trying to interact with them. You certainly don't want to kill them for food or anything else. But do we have a sense of how healthy in our, sort of surrounding waters, how healthy the shark population could be?
We have a rough idea from our research about the numbers. However, they are still very low, and we only have a rough estimate of the Caribbean reef and nurse shark because they are the most abundant. The other species are way too little recorded on our surveys, the numbers wise, that we can even try to estimate. So you can see from that our shark population in general is quite low, the numbers in general. So they are quite suppressed, and conservation is of high priority.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Sandra, if I can just jump in there, a good comparison for this might be to the turtle population or nesting turtle population. We've all seen those numbers coming back up over the years, but when you stop and think about it, it's actually still really, really low.
Right.
But going from something that was so low, a few more suddenly becomes noticeable. And so, while we think sharks are on the right track, as Johanna said, the numbers are still so incredibly low. They're still essentially a threatened species locally as well as internationally. But as I said, we're seeing them a bit better now.
And if I can say, it will
Yes.
take a while because with the turtles, it took tens of years to even see now an increase that we're recently seeing. With sharks, it will be the same thing. In 2015, they've been protected, and it's only been 6 years, 7 years now that they have been fully protected, and then it took longer for people to realize the protection. So sharks have a very long gestation period and generation. You can almost compare it to humans, although I don't do that a lot. But Caribbean reef sharks, for example, they have a gestation period of up to a year.
Oh,
So
wow.
And then they only have a few pups per litter, so only like maybe 3 to 6 sharks per litter, and maybe not all of them even survive because there is no parental care. A mother shark, she will give birth, and then they're immediately on their own. So they have to find food like little crustaceans and fish immediately after birth. So that's a
Wow.
really tough start to life,
Yeah,
and
sure.
some of them may not survive. So as you can
Yes.
see, it will take generations over generations for us even to see an increase to healthy numbers, and that's why it's important to have this protection for decades to then see an increase or a change.
So I'm assuming that this protection that you're speaking of also would make it illegal for anyone to kill a shark in inner waters.
Yes, absolutely. So sharks are completely protected, 100% illegal to hurt them, harm them, kill them in any way. For anybody else, yes, we know occasionally they get foul hooked when you're fishing, they caught accident when fishing. The fishermen all know how to just release them, let them go, no problems. What we do not want is anybody targeting sharks. If that is just like any other kind of poaching, if we get anybody doing that, we will try to prosecute them. So
Very
yeah,
good.
sharks protected, full stop.
Yes, wonderful. Good to know. So, shark food, what sort of foods are they attracted to? I know a lot of people think that they love humans, that they're attracted to humans, but I know for a fact that that actually isn't the case. I don't think we probably taste particularly good to sharks, but I guess if you're in the way, it might happen. But what is it? What sort of food do they really prefer and what do they like?
Like most predators, sharks are attracted to food, yes, and they're especially attracted to oily fish, such as tuna and mackerel,
Okay.
and also fish guts and fish blood. Um, so the oil from an oily fish will travel quite far, and sharks can pick that up. So that's why our regulations say that at the sandbar, people and visitors and companies should use squid and ballyhoo and other white fish, which has a less oil content, so that the smell, first of all, is more contained at the sandbar and won't travel as far. And the sharks in general are not as attracted, they're not as interested in a white fish with less oil content because it's not as nutritious. The higher the oil content, the more nutritious it is to a predator and a shark. And that's why they usually are not that interested in white fish, let's say. And yeah, so that's why they usually that's why our regulations say that we have, like, you should use squid and ballyhoo.
So that I mean that's a bit of news to me. So the law actually prohibits folks the use of oily fish, tuna, and fish guts or fish blood for feeding the stingrays. So again, the primary reason for that is so that we don't attract things like sharks into the area. So very, very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about this wildlife interaction zone. First of all, what is the wildlife interaction zones that we have in the Cayman Islands?
Happy to take that one again. So we have two of them. They are at the sandbar itself, and I know there's some interchangeability about the names of the various areas. And then Stingray City Deep, which is the dive site. Both of them are in the North Sound, and they have regulations that basically they achieve a number of things. As I mentioned previously, they allow visitors to interact with the wildlife that is in there. In particular, I mean, they primarily were set up for stingrays. But there was some degree of management required because the numbers of visitors at the sandbar sometimes can be a little excessive. So we initially issued guidelines. They weren't really taken on board very easily. It was difficult to police them. So they later became a little bit more restricted through regulations. So basically, commercial operators entering wildlife zones need a permit. So DOE, through the National Conservation Council, issues the permits and the WIS licenses, as we refer to them, that allows people to go. They then have guidelines about the number of hours they can be there, how many boats can be there, how many people can be on the boats, and also, as Johanna was mentioning, they dictate the type of food sources that can be used. The approved foods can only be used, and it's all about managing the situation and allowing, as I mentioned, a potentially difficult situation where people are feeding wildlife, trying to manage that in a manner that allows it to proceed but prevents it becoming problematic for the rest of the animals in the area and indeed in Cayman in general. People may remember when diving well, diving is still very popular, but when I was growing up, fish feeding when you were diving was a big thing, and you take, and the fish loved it and people loved it, but it was really not good in terms of getting fish acclimatized to human behavior, making them easy targets for spear fishermen or any kind of taking. And so any association of humans and food ultimately is not a good thing in the marine environment, as we are seeing now with the shark activity that's starting to associate itself with the feeding. But yeah, the wildlife interaction zones are part of our marine parks and marine protected area systems with a view to managing and controlling that. Hopefully I covered everything, John. John's our legislation man, so he's much better at this stuff than me.
Yeah. So really it's trying to encourage this balancing act where people can enjoy a bit of the environment and the marine life, but without encroaching too much so that you're actually harming the marine life.
That's absolutely right. It allows us the ability to regulate it and to prevent it becoming problematic. Probably the most famous example is like bear feeding in national parks in Canada and the US. That was a really big, controversial, difficult thing, and ended up with bears constantly losing their lives. So that's probably the most famous example of feeding going wrong.
Yep. Is there any expansion, or is the Department of Environment looking at any additional areas that could be considered a wildlife interaction zone? I'm thinking the starfish, but maybe there's some other areas that are under consideration.
That's a really interesting thing. So we have had proposals in the past where people were interested in trying to set up satellite stingray city sandbar experiences in order to try to alleviate some of the pressure at the sandbar. And that's one of the reasons why the present sandbar wildlife interaction zone extends so far east towards the Rum Point area. It doesn't actually capture Rum Point, but it captures some shallow areas where potentially there could have been some relocation. That never occurred. We have had other people posing stingray visitor sites in other sounds around the island. That's been met with a lot of resistance, as you might imagine, locally from probably boat operators and tour operators, where at the moment you need to get on a boat to go see a stingray. The day you can get in your car and drive to a shore-based variety could have a big impact on that. So currently I'm not aware of any proposals to do that, and certainly we're not working with any at the moment, but it's not impossible. Our zones need to be set up, but we have the ability to establish new ones. So yeah, it could happen, but no, I'm not aware of any at the moment.
Very good. So the issue that we're seeing at the moment with the sharks being attracted specifically to Stingray City is, considered a man-made issue. So we are the reason why they're doing it, as you've mentioned earlier. It's because of feeding that's going on in the area with the stingrays. So what sort of behavioral changes, other than not using the oily fish, which we mentioned earlier, what else can people do when they're out there and they notice a shark in the area? What's your best advice?
Well, I'll take that one, Sandy. The best advice is simply don't feed the sharks. Let's start with the basics. And what we're telling people is, if the shark does come around, stop feeding whatever it is you're feeding. Because obviously the shark is smelling the food in the water. That's what's attracted it up. Or it knows that the area has some extra food there. So stop feeding the stingrays. Get the food out of the water, first step, and then get your people out of the water as well. This is one of those balancing acts that you said that we're really working. We're not sure how to approach this, so we really look forward to the people on your show almost helping us with this. We don't want people to panic. Imagine a sandbar, 50, 100, 200 people out there. Don't everybody that will go and rush away. We don't want people afraid of the sharks like that. These sharks aren't that kind of danger, but obviously it is still a shark. We're suggesting everybody calmly exit the water. You're on board the boat, you can watch the shark swim around. The shark will get bored. There's no food in the water for it. It's going to swim off. You can resume your in-water activities. But when the shark does show up, A, don't feed it. B, stop feeding completely. C, calmly get out of the water, get away from the shark. Not necessarily because the shark is a threat to you, but nobody wants an accident to happen.
Right.
And that's really what it would be on everybody's part, would be an accident. And let's try and avoid that.
Yeah. And you mentioned that, we're not, They're not that kind of shark, as you said. They're not like a
Can I
great
jump
white
in?
shark. Yes, absolutely.
I'm always saying, tagging on what John just said, I always say, don't fear the shark, don't be afraid of it, but respect it. It's
Yes.
their environment. So if it comes around because we feed the stingray, so we put food into the water, it is a predator. It comes around, it checks it out to see what's going on. They are inquisitive. We have to respect it and remove the food because we don't want this to continue them being learning this behavior. They need to stop learning that behavior. So we have to remove the food. Let's go out of the water, enjoy the experience for what it is while it is there. And then once it leaves, you can resume your activities. You can put the food back in. You can enjoy the stingrays as before. But I always say, don't be afraid because it isn't an immediate danger, but we want to avoid any unintentional accidents.
Right. Okay. Very good. So that actually answers the next question. So, folks, just a couple tips. If you see a shark at the sandbar, again, as they've just said, stop any stingray feeding. Calmly make your way back to your boat. Ensure any remaining stingray food is removed from the water. And you can enjoy the sharks from the boat. They'll probably just swim around for a little bit longer, and then they may leave and go back, wherever their home base is. And once the sharks have left the area, you're able to resume your stingray experience. Boat operators. Now, we've talked about this, I feel like, a lot, and their role in handling of stingrays. And they kind of can play a very important role in that they set the tone for a lot of the visitors and people, their clientele who are on the boats. What would you say to them if you wanted to give them some advice? Because they have a very, very important role to play. What would you say to them about what they can do?
I think it would probably be to please be thoughtful about what we're doing. A lot of this has been sort of unintended consequences. People thinking they were doing something nice or something new, not a problem, and then it develops into a problem. So please be thoughtful and please follow the protocols, not even just the rules, but there's reasons for best practices, and that's to try and keep things from becoming a problem. And please definitely do not feed the sharks. We understand how for some people this was quite an amazing thing to see when it was just them out there at the sandbar or just them in the water or select persons who were felt comfortable with the sharks. We've all seen some of those beautiful pictures that were taken, right place, right time, no problems. But don't encourage that because although it hasn't been a problem for anybody yet, thankfully, no one does want a problem to occur. So you're being thoughtful and controlling yourself and the people who come aboard your boat. The ones who may have heard of this and say, hey, I hear there's sharks out here. Just tell them no. We understand that can be hard to do to tell somebody no, even telling yourself no, but it is what we have to do here to make it continue to be a good experience for everybody. Because as you probably, as we all know, some people do get scared of things and sharks are on that list. And not to make anybody feel bad about that at all. I've been in the water with sharks. So, it's suddenly a slightly different size animal than you're used to being in the water with. That makes you feel different. And that is just completely natural. But that's what we don't want anybody else then getting scared and frightened and getting hurt. So it is about everybody playing their part. And so it's the operators just saying, no, I'm not doing this. The guests saying, no, I don't need the shark to come around. I'm not asking for that. And while, yes, 99% of the people out there are on these trips are tourists, we all know we do take the boats ourselves. We hire somebody, we go out, have a nice time in the sound at the sandbar. Don't ask for it. And let the guides know we appreciate that they're not trying to promote this as a thing on the side and get it and cause trouble for everyone else. So it is about everybody, but particularly the guides who this is their product out there, managing their product and saying, no, we're not feeding the sharks.
Because there has to be an appreciation that, for the next generation or even for this generation, 5-10 years down the line, there has to be some thought about sustainability. When you're saying, yes, this is a product, well, if it's not sustainable because we're having such a negative impact on the environment, it's a short-term gain. It's not going to help anyone in the long term.
Exactly.
So let's, and by the way, for the record, I'd be one of those people that would literally jump out of my skin if I saw a shark in the water.
And I want to just add on to that. I just want to reiterate, it is a man-made problem. If we change our behavior, the nature will respond. It will take a while and we need to be consistent and not one person continuing doing it. Everyone has to stop for the nature to respond, because I've also heard like suggestions like killing the shark, obviously not an option, but also relocating sharks. That's also not going to work. We have to change our behavior. We need to make them unlearn that behavior, because we know from our surveys that sharks, our Caribbean reef sharks that travel between all three islands, the Grand Cayman ones travel to Little Cayman, Bragg, the Bragg ones come over here. They travel throughout. So even if we relocate a shark from the sandbar to East End or Little Cayman for that matter, they will come back when that's their home range.
Right.
We even had like I've recently tracked a little nurse shark from the west side up around Northwest Point Northwest Point to the North Wall, for example. So over a course of a year, it's just shifting there. That's how they go. They go over to prey. They have their home range, and they are present in that over time. And it may shift, but it's a dynamic system, and that's why when we even relocating a shark, that won't work. So we really have to change our behavior if we want this to stop.
Right. Very interesting. So let's talk about starfish and some best practices. And this is one that gets under my skin all the time, because I swear on at least a weekly basis, I receive photos of people who are taking them, out of the ocean. They're posing with them. They're doing all sorts of stuff just for that photo opportunity. And I can't imagine really what it's doing to the starfish. Now, I was told that during the pandemic, the starfish seemed to return in larger numbers. Now again, the tourists are back and people are out there. The first question I have is it illegal to interact or to touch the starfish? It seems to be a question of taking it out of the water versus not taking it out, but you can touch it.
Yeah. So great question. And like you said earlier, this is about achieving balance. So to start with the basics, starfish are completely protected. This was actually put in place back before starfish were a concern for anybody, when we're looking at certain other related species that were either being overcollected here or over-harvested in other places. And we didn't want to see that come here. So we said all echinoderms, so all starfish and their cousins, protected, full stop. But we also recognize people do like to interact with the starfish. And so what we said is do not lift them out of the water. Rather than trying to treat this like a whiz area, let's use some discretion and some common sense and say, as long as you're handling them gently. So obviously anybody, even in the water, kind of trying to pull an arm off or something, no. But if you're just picking up gently, keeping it in the water, looking at it, putting it back down at the bottom, yes, that's stressing the starfish out. But, experience is showing us it's not as bad, it's not something they can't handle. So whereas we have seen those other examples of, let's say, some of the pictures you get, older pictures of a dozen starfish on the deck of a hot deck of a boat for quite a while.
Yeah.
And when that starfish goes back in the water, it's just they're kind of floating on the surface, 3/4 dead. There's a line that we don't want people crossing. And so to keep it simple without anybody having to argue biology, leave the starfish in the water, handle it gently, that's okay. But also, please don't just slop on the sunscreen before you go and handle the starfish or the stingrays as well. Give that a bit of time to work in before you start grabbing them. Obviously, it's the Cayman Islands. Wear sunscreen, but respect these animals as well. Don't give them a chemical bath when you go to pick them up, but keep them in the water. They can keep breathing, so they're going to be less stressed than if you lift them out of the water. Handle them gently. Put them back down. And yes, there are wild animals in the open sea. If they're getting overhandled, they'll move away. If there's too many just feet walking around them, they'll move a little bit back further out into the turtle grass. And so to an extent, they'll achieve a sort of a natural balance as long as people aren't really treating them badly, which is again ruined for everybody. So this comes down to everyone, please use a bit of sort of decency towards the starfish, follow the best practice recommendations, leave them in the water, don't mishandle them, avoid sunscreen when you go to handle them, and we don't have to worry about the fact that they are completely protected, so no one needs to get arrested, because that would just be a horrible outcome for anyone who had that happen to them.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things. I mean, I feel this is just my personal view that maybe we shouldn't even touch them, because it's kind of like you're saying, okay, take I'll give you 6 inches, but don't take the full 12. And I find that when it comes to these creatures, I guess because people just find them so intriguing and amazing, that they always push the envelope a little bit. Oh, let me just do a quick photo shoot where I like hold it up to my face, I'm kissing it or whatever. And I don't know, but one of the issues that has been brought up by other people is that the signage in the area could be improved. Is the Department of Environment looking at improving? First of all, the signage is way too long. I think there's signs up there with too many words, and nobody's going to stand there and read that before they get in the water with the starfish. So can we get some simplified signage that it's really, really clear? Do not remove, because I think the signage says something about don't remove the starfish, and people think, oh, that means I can't take it home, but that doesn't mean I can't lift it out of the water. So I think there needs to be some clarification in the wording, and just make it as basic and simple as possible using the KISS principle. So are you guys considering any signage that could be improved in that area?
We're not actively considering it, but we're very open to it. The signage there and other places is something we've gone back and forth on over the years. And so if some members of the public felt there's a better way to say it and wanted to do their own design contest or whatever and figure out here is the right sign for this, we'd be happy to then run with it. We're biologists. We're not necessarily sign people. If there's a better way to say something, we're really open to it. That most of our signs, but those ones there were kind of designed by committee almost. So yeah, we understand that they may not be the best. We're very open to changing how we say anything, because what we do want is for people to understand what the rules are. And this is some of the challenge. What is the law? What is the best practice? How do we communicate that to people? We're very open to better ways of communicating it. But also, we really want to say appreciate, Sandy, you, this show, and all the people on social media who call out every time they see one of these incidents, because that is the best PR we've got. It's not our sign, as everybody's saying, this is not right. Leave it, works much better than anything we can say, but we're open to changing things.
Absolutely. And it's powerful because, I mean, people say, oh my gosh, I did that. I didn't know. So I think a lot of it is, trying to educate people, because if people simply don't know how to handle wildlife and how they're being harmful, it's not even necessarily that there's an intent there. Another issue that I find, though, going back to the tour operators, is a lot of them are just thinking about that dollar and trying to make, their guests on their boat happy for the afternoon. And they're not saying to them, hey, this is a protected species and there's certain things that we can and can't do. So before you even get out of the boat, I want you to know to please don't lift it out of the water, be extremely gentle, just kind of doing a run through. So are you guys offering any active training for any of the tour operators to kind of remind them on a regular basis that these are the rules and, here's how they can approach this as they carry out, as a tour guide, as they carry out these tours?
Sandy, that's a really good thing. It's something we've struggled with for the longest time. We have often thought about trying to introduce, maybe not mandatory, but a local certification, if you like. Someone's been to the Department of Environment, learnt about the marine parks, learnt about the issues, and could then produce that as even some kind of marketing feature. We have never actually managed to do that, but we do put out a lot of information about what is acceptable. We try to really make sure, as you said before, people are educated, particularly the water sports operators, because as you rightly point out, they are the main people here. They ultimately have the power to really make sure this goes. And that idea that the captains are chasing their dollars, it's an interesting, I agree with that, but there's this just growing wave of, maybe through social media, but more environmental responsibility, that if you read various reviews, TripAdvisor, those kind of things, people people call out their captains when they don't abide by that. And so I think there's this increasing kind of peer pressure. I mean, I've been to Starfish Key myself, and heard other people shouting at people, "Hey, put that back!" So they're really, as John says, the users, the community pressure to abide by the rules or to be respectful is really growing, and that's very encouraging because it makes our job easier. But all of that, obviously, as you point out, has to come with the education. And we would love to introduce some kind of, if we had the resources, to have some kind of, I don't want to say training because we're not training people. These people are brilliant boat operators. They're brilliant bastions of the marine environment. So we don't. It's just some kind of certification. We would be just talking through why these issues are important. Because when people understand why they're important, much easier to do it.
Yeah.
If you, as John says, if you know you're impacting a starfish, you wouldn't do it. Most of this stuff is not malevolent. It's just people who aren't aware of what they're doing. So yeah, it is something we'd like to do. We do work well or often with the water sports groups as much as we can. When there are specific issues, we try to get their input. We have meetings with them. The last 2 years, everything's been a bit disrupted, so we don't have anything recent to really draw upon. But yeah, we do try to work closely with them. But in terms of formal training, other than our outreach material, we don't really have a lot.
And what we have produced in the past is a training, how to handle a stingray training video that was circulated out to the different water sports operators. Not required, but yeah, this is how you do it. Here's what the rules are. So if you find you're not doing it this way, you know better. And we are working on some stuff for Department of Tourism that hopefully to take that kind of best practice to perhaps more things that are out there, particularly in the North Sound, than just the stingrays. Because of course, that's what we're focused on first. Now everybody knows what not to do with a stingray. Let's start talking about things like the starfish, or also don't feed sharks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
so
we
folks,
do have
yes, thank you, Joanna.
and we do have regulations on how to safely release a shark. There is like bits and pieces out there, yes. But I also must agree that every time I go there, I see people caring and educating the others, and I think that's great because every single one of us can be a conservationist out there by educating the people that don't know, and especially visitors that come to the island. They don't know the rules. They may have never seen a stingray before or a starfish, so they're not even know anything about this. So yeah, every time you see something, just approach them nicely and educate them and say, "Hey, did you know?" Because most people don't even know, and it's just unintended.
And even as parents, I was just having a think about this. I've got a 5. She's going to be 6 soon, a 5-year-old. But she loves to go to the beach, and she likes to pick up seashells and bring them home. And I keep saying to her, it's really important that you appreciate Mother Nature where it is, and you leave it where you see it. Like, you can enjoy it, you can look at it, you can even take a photo of it. But imagine if every single person in the world wanted to take something away with them when they left the beach, all the fish and the seashell and everything else. And, she kind of is starting to now think about it. She goes, "Oh yeah, I can look at this, but I have to put it back, right, Mom?" And I said, "Yes." So I think there's such simple messages. But, as she gets older, that will translate into her, whether it's a starfish or something else that she might see in the ocean, in the ecosystem, thinking that she can just put that in a bucket of water and want to take that home. It's like, nope, look at it, enjoy it. Sometimes you don't even want to touch it. Take a photo and leave it exactly where it is. All right, folks. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on the program today. This was a very, very educational and interesting segment. We had some representatives from the Department of Environment teaching us a bit about sharks, how to safely deal with the situation if you do see a shark sighting, particularly at Stingray City and the sandbar, and also, of course, Starfish Point. And if you see starfish anywhere else, what are the best practices as it relates to them as well? So we all have a part to play in this. As Joanna said, everybody can be a little mini conservationist. Doesn't mean that we're the experts. We're going to leave the expertise up to them because they're the real experts. But we still have a very, very important role to play in educating ourselves, sharing of information, and encouraging people to do the right thing when it comes to the ocean wildlife. Any final comments?
I'll just jump in and say thanks very much. It's been a real pleasure to be here. Thank you. And as you say, everybody can do their part, and appreciate what we have here. You know, it's pretty unique. So look after it, and it'll be here for everybody else and people in the future. So thank you again.
Absolutely. All right, folks. So thank you for listening to this segment.